Hey guys, tonight we're walking somewhere people usually avoid a cemetery. But not just any cemetery. This one has a plot with my name on it waiting for me carved neatly into stone. I bought it years ago after my wife passed. Thought it was practical. Thought it was mature. I never imagined I'd be back there alive, staring down at my own grave and seeing something no living person should ever see. Fresh flowers. You probably won't survive this story. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. It started as one of those quiet Tuesday mornings when life feels too still. My house had that retired man's silence coffee cooling on the table, a half-finished crossword, and a radio whispering old jazz. I'd been retired for almost a year, and people told me this was the golden time. But truth be told, retirement feels less golden when the person you shared 50 years with is gone. My wife, Clara, had always handled the emotional things. I was the one who buried myself in work, paperwork, taxes, planning even buying the burial plots for us both years ago. It seemed sensible then, something two adults should do. But that morning, something made me want to see it again. Maybe curiosity, maybe boredom, maybe, if I'm honest, a strange pull toward closure. The cemetery was only 20 minutes away on the edge of town, where the air smells faintly of pine and rain-soaked soil. The caretaker, a quiet man named Henry, nodded when I arrived. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said. I didn't remember ever meeting him, but I smiled politely and walked toward the eastern row where my wife rested. Her stone was modest, simple marble, her name, her favorite verse. I brushed off the leaves, talked to her a little, the way lonely widowers do. Then I turned toward the empty plot beside hers mine. And there they were, a bouquet of fresh white lilies, perfectly arranged, the ribbon still damp from dew, and at the base of the stone my name, Daniel Mercer, already engraved. Birth date, August 4th, 1954, blank space for the end date. It felt like ice slid down my spine. I didn't remember authorizing that. In fact, I distinctly recalled leaving it unmarked, waiting until the time came. Who would go ahead and carve it without telling me? For a moment, I stood frozen, watching the wind move the petals. My first irrational thought, someone was playing a cruel joke. Maybe one of those dark humor friends from my old job. But this wasn't a prank. The flowers were too fresh, the engraving too clean. Henry noticed me standing there and came over slowly, his boots crunching over the gravel. "Everything all right, Mr. Mercer?" he asked. I pointed to the stone. "When did this get engraved?" He frowned, tilted his cap back. "Didn't you approve that yesterday?" My breath caught. "Yesterday?" "Yeah. You came by in the afternoon, said you wanted to finalize it. Even brought the receipt from the stone company. Told me you'd be back today to check the placement of flowers." I laughed, but it came out strange, brittle. "You must be mixing me up with someone else." Henry scratched his chin. "Sir, I've been here 20 years. I don't mix up faces that easily. You were wearing that brown jacket and hat same as today. I hadn't worn that jacket in weeks. I felt suddenly aware of how heavy the air felt. There's a strange kind of panic that doesn't come from danger, but from confusion, like reality twisting just slightly out of shape. I stepped closer, touching the letters of my own name. They were cold, freshly cut, the edges still sharp. I half expected my fingers to come away dusty from stone powder. Instead, they came back clean. Someone had polished it. "You mind telling me who brought those flowers?" I asked Henry. He shrugged. "Didn't see who left them. Could have been you. Could have been someone who loves you." There was something eerie about that phrasing, "someone who loves you." I thanked him and left, pretending everything was fine. But inside, my thoughts were a mess. Who else would bring flowers to my grave? My wife was gone. My kids, they barely remembered I existed unless it was about money. Driving home, I kept glancing at my rearview mirror, half expecting to see, well, me. I know that sounds ridiculous, but my mind went there anyway. People still debate whether it's bravery or madness to face death head-on. I think it's both. I thought about that grave all the way home, about how it was supposed to symbolize peace, but all I felt was intrusion. Someone had entered a place meant only for my final rest. Back at home, I pulled out the file where I kept all the burial paperwork. Every contract, every receipt, every date was in order except for one. The receipt from the engraving company was missing. Maybe I'd misplaced it. Or maybe it had never been sent to me. I checked my emails, my phone messages, nothing. A psychologist once said older people start making peace with death by controlling it, organizing wills, cleaning houses, choosing cemeteries. It gives them a sense of power. But finding those flowers that stone my name, it didn't feel like control. It felt like someone else had taken over my ending. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked like old bones, and the clock ticked too loudly. Around midnight, I caught myself staring at my reflection in the window, wondering absurdly if maybe I had gone to the cemetery the day before and just forgotten. Forgetfulness creeps into your 60s like fog. Maybe I'd simply slipped. But then again, I never forget her Clara. And she would have told me I thought. She always told me when I was losing myself. Before I turned in, I looked at the photograph of her on the nightstand. Who brought those flowers? Clara, I murmured. Who's visiting me before I'm even gone? The house gave no answer, only silence. But somewhere in that silence, the unease stayed a whisper that something about those flowers wasn't random at all. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, restless and irritated, like I'd been having a conversation in my sleep that I couldn't remember. The thought of those flowers wouldn't leave me alone. It wasn't just about the gesture, it was about the precision. White lilies. My wife's favorite. Whoever left them didn't choose at random. They knew exactly what those flowers meant to me. Clara used to say white lilies were for promises kept. And now they were sitting on my grave as if someone had made a promise to me I didn't know about. I made my coffee stronger than usual, bitter enough to sting my tongue, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the phone. I should have called the stone company first, but I dialed my son Peter instead. He picked up on the third ring, sounding half distracted. "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" "Not exactly," I said. "Did you order my headstone engraving?" There was a pause long enough to count the seconds. "What are you talking about?" "The headstone at the cemetery," I explained. "It has my name on it now. Birth date, everything, even flowers. The caretaker said someone came in yesterday, said it was me." Peter let out a short laugh, the kind that sounds more nervous than amused. "Dad, are you sure you're not mixing things up? Maybe the caretaker confused you with someone else." I clenched my jaw. "He said I came in wearing my brown jacket and hat, the same ones I wore yesterday when I visited." Silence again. "Then, you sure you didn't stop by there before and forget you've been... since Mom passed, don't?" I snapped sharper than I intended. "Don't finish that sentence." He sighed. "Okay, fine. But no, I didn't order anything. Why would I? You told us you didn't want that done until..." He stopped, catching himself. "Until you're gone." He didn't have to say it. When I hung up, I checked my drawer for the cemetery receipts again. And there it was, tucked neatly between two old insurance forms, the receipt for the engraving. But something was wrong. The signature at the bottom, it was Peter's, My son's neat accountant-style handwriting. The ink was dark fresh, like it hadn't aged. I drove to the cemetery office later that morning, determined to get answers. The clerk, a young woman with perfect nails and tired eyes, looked up my name in the system. "Yes, Mr. Mercer," she said. "You were here on Monday. You confirmed the engraving and paid the balance." "Monday?" I asked. "That's impossible. I was home all day. Ask my neighbor, he saw me mowing the lawn." She gave me a cautious smile, the kind professionals give when they think they're dealing with a confused old man. "Well, maybe a relative handled it for you. The paperwork says the authorization came from your family." "My family?" "Yes, sir. A Mr. Peter Mercer signed the form." I leaned in. "And what about the flowers?" She blinked. "Oh, those? Those are automatically refreshed every Saturday. We have a standing floral order on your plot." "By whom?" She scrolled through her screen, then frowned slightly. "It says, by a Ms. Clara Mercer." I felt my stomach drop. "That's my wife," I said quietly. "She's been dead for 7 years." The woman's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Oh," she whispered, "that's odd. Odd." That was one way to put it. I left the office before she could say anything else, gripping the steering wheel tight all the way home. The drive felt longer this time, every street sign like a blurred reminder of something I couldn't place. When I finally got home, I pulled out one of Clara's old address books. She'd been meticulous about keeping records even long after everyone else switched to phones. Inside, tucked between the yellowing pages, was a small business card from Harper's Floral and Memorials, the same shop that had handled her funeral flowers. I drove there immediately. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, releasing a soft waft of perfume and roses. Behind the counter stood an older woman arranging carnations in a vase. "Good morning," she said warmly. Looking for something special today, I placed the receipt on the counter. "Actually, I'm looking for whoever's been sending these flowers to my grave." Her hands froze mid-arrangement. "To your grave?" "Yes. White lilies every week, ordered under the name Clara Mercer." The florist hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I know the order. It's been active for about 6 months." 6 months, I repeated. "Who placed it?" She pursed her lips. "Well, a woman. Came in personally. Said she wanted it to be anonymous, but she gave a name for billing Clara Mercer." "Describe her." She was polite, soft-spoken, maybe in her 30s. Wore a light blue coat, brown hair, shoulder length. "Oh, and she had a ring, a silver one, with a small emerald." I froze. That sounded exactly like my daughter-in-law, Megan. Back in the car, my mind raced. Why would Megan of all people be visiting my grave? She barely spoke to me unless it was about family events or money. We'd never been close. Clara never trusted her either. She once told me Megan was too polished, too calm, the kind of woman who smiles when she lies. At home, I sat in my study staring at Clara's photograph on the shelf. "Did you tell her something?" I muttered aloud. "Did you ask her to do this?" It wouldn't have been like Clara to leave secrets behind. Or maybe that's exactly what she'd done. She'd always liked her mysteries, hiding birthday gifts in the attic, leaving letters under pillows. Once, she left me a note in my car just to say, "I love you more when you're confused." Maybe this was one last game. That evening, Peter called back. "Dad, Megan told me you called the florist." So she admitted it. She said it's part of Mom's memorial routine. Mom asked her before she died to make sure both graves were taken care of, including yours. Did she also ask her to engrave my name and pretend I'd visited? I snapped. Peter hesitated. "Dad, maybe she just wanted to help." "Help?" I laughed bitterly. "By pretending I'm dead." He sighed. "Look, maybe it's just her way of honoring Mom. Don't make it a big deal." But it was a big deal. because it wasn't just about flowers or stone. It was about control, about who gets to write the last line of your story. And suddenly, I wasn't sure it was me anymore. That night, I took out Clara's old journals. They smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I flipped through years of handwriting until I found an entry dated 2 months before she passed. If Daniel ever forgets how loved he is, promise him the flowers. Promise him. I'll be waiting. It didn't say who she'd written it to, but the ink was shaky, and below it faintly was a line that made my skin crawl. He must see his name before the end. He must know it's ready. I sat there for hours, staring at that page. The wind howled softly outside, and I felt the house tilt with the weight of memory. People still debate whether love should comfort the living or prepare them for death. I think Clara believed in the latter. She was always trying to teach lessons even from the other side of her absence. But if that's true, then why involve Megan? Why hide it? Why engrave the stone without telling me? There was something more here, something beyond sentiment. By midnight, I knew what I had to do. Tomorrow I'd visit Megan in person. No more polite calls, no more theories. I wanted to hear it from her lips why my grave was ready before I was. And as I turned off the light, one thought refused to leave me. If the flowers were meant to comfort me, why did they feel like a countdown instead? The next day, the sky looked heavy, the kind of dull gray that presses against your skin. I drove to Peter and Megan's house with that same weight in my chest. I told myself to stay calm, to ask questions, not accusations. But I'd been a father long enough to know that when you feel betrayed by your own blood, calm is a luxury. They lived in one of those suburban neighborhoods that all look the same. Clean driveways, trimmed lawns, silence that feels choreographed. Megan opened the door before I could even knock twice. She wore that same polite smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. "Daniel," she said warmly. "What a surprise." "Is it?" I asked. "Because I think you already know why I'm here." She blinked, pretending confusion, but I saw the flicker, a flash of recognition she couldn't hide. "Why don't you come in?" The house smelled of cinnamon candles and new carpet. Everything was neat, symmetrical, controlled like her. Peter appeared from the hallway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Dad, I didn't think you'd actually—" "I'm not here for small talk," I interrupted. "I just need to know one thing. Why are there flowers on my grave every week, Megan?" She stiffened. "Your grave? Don't play dumb. The florist described you, blue coat, brown hair, emerald ring. She said you've been ordering those flowers for 6 months. Peter looked at her, puzzled. "Megan," she hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "Fine. Yes, I've been sending the flowers, but not for the reason you think. Then enlighten me." She walked to the window, staring out as if trying to compose herself. "Your wife, Clara, she left me a letter before she died. She asked me to take care of the cemetery arrangements for both of you. She didn't want you burdened with it." I frowned. "A letter? What letter?" "She gave it to me privately," Megan said. "Said you'd never accept help, that you'd keep everything locked up in that study of yours until you—" She stopped herself. "Until you were gone." Peter crossed his arms. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because your father would have reacted exactly like this," she said, voice rising slightly. "He hates being taken care of. I was just trying to honor your mother's wishes." It sounded rehearsed, too smooth. I'd spent decades reading people, clients, co-workers, friends, and I could tell when someone was building a story as they spoke. She wasn't lying completely, but she was bending the truth around something she didn't want exposed. I stepped closer. "Then why forge my son's signature on the paperwork?" Her lips parted, stunned. What I saw, the receipt. Peter's name, Peter's handwriting, only he didn't sign it. She looked at him wide-eyed. I didn't forge anything. Maybe the cemetery copied it from an old record. Don't insult me, I snapped. You and I both know that kind of mistake doesn't just happen. Peter tried to intervene. Dad, please. Maybe it was a clerical. Peter, I said, keeping my voice steady. Your wife's been pretending to be my dead wife to send flowers to my grave. Doesn't that sound a little strange to you? He didn't answer, just rubbed his temples and muttered, This is getting out of hand. Megan's eyes hardened. You think I wanted any of this? Your wife made me promise Daniel. She said she didn't trust anyone else to make sure you'd accept the idea of death. She said you were too stubborn to ever face it. She said that I whispered. She said you'd never prepare properly unless someone made it real for you. The flowers, the engraving, it was all part of her plan. I wanted to believe that. It even sounded like something Clara would do, dramatic, symbolic, quietly manipulative, in a loving way. But there was one problem, the tone in Megan's voice. It wasn't empathy. It was control. She asked you to do this. 7 years ago, I asked. Yes. And you started 6 months ago. Megan hesitated. I waited until I felt it was time. Time for what? She didn't answer. She just looked at me with a small, cold smile that sent a shiver down my spine. That was when I noticed something else on the mantel above the fireplace sat a framed photo of Clara and me taken years ago. Only it wasn't ours. It was a copy, the same one that used to sit on my bedside table. How did you get that? I asked, pointing. Oh, Megan said softly. I thought it looked nice here. Peter brought some of your things over last month when we cleaned your attic. Peter looked startled. What? No, I didn't. He stopped mid-sentence, staring at her. I realized then this wasn't just about sentiment. Megan had been collecting pieces of my life, my wife's handwriting, my memories, even my photo frames, quietly moving my history into her own house. I turned to Peter. Son, you need to check your bank records. If she's been using Mom's name, there might be more going on. Megan's voice cut sharp. Don't you dare accuse me of anything illegal. But guilt is a loud thing. It leaks through tone, posture, silence. Hers screamed. I left their house before things could escalate, the image of that copied photo haunting me all the way home. The air outside felt thick, electric, as if something unseen was tightening around me. That night, I couldn't focus. Every creak of the house sounded deliberate, like someone walking softly. I poured myself a drink, even though I'd sworn off whiskey after Clara died. 1 glass turned into 2. The amber liquid burned, grounding me. People still debate whether paranoia is just intuition with bad manners. Maybe it was. But I knew in my gut that Megan wasn't just fulfilling Clara's wishes. There was something more deliberate in her actions, something almost territorial. Around midnight, I remembered the caretaker's words. You came yesterday to approve it. If Megan was impersonating me or using my name, there'd be proof. Maybe the cemetery had cameras. The next morning, I drove back to Henry's office. He was stacking boxes when I arrived. Henry, I said you still got that visitor log from Monday. He nodded. Sure do. He flipped through a worn clipboard until he found the page. There it was. Daniel Mercer signed neatly in my handwriting. But I hadn't been there. May I see the CCTV footage from that day, I asked? He hesitated. That's not usually allowed, sir. Please, just this once. He studied me for a long moment, then sighed and turned the monitor around. The black and white footage played grainy, time-stamped Monday afternoon. And there I was, or rather, someone wearing my brown jacket and hat, walking up to Henry's desk, nodding, signing the log. The face was blurred, but the movements, slow, careful, familiar, were unmistakably mine. I felt my knees weaken. Pause it, I said. Zoom in. Henry frowned. Can't get much detail. But The screen froze on the figure's left hand, and there it was, a silver ring with a green stone, an emerald. I didn't say a word, just thanked. Henry got in my car and sat there gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. It wasn't my reflection I'd been seeing, it was hers. Megan had been there dressed like me, signing as me, arranging everything down to the flowers. I don't remember much of the drive home, only that I kept repeating under my breath, "Why, Megan, why?" Back in my study, I found another one of Clara's journals, the last one she ever wrote in. Inside, between the final pages, was a folded note I'd never seen before. My hands trembled as I opened it. If she ever forgets her promise, remind her what love costs. Remind her who she's doing it for. No signature. Just Clara's handwriting and an address scrawled at the bottom. Megan's address. So Clara had involved her. But not just as a helper. As a keeper of something. A promise. A secret. Maybe even guilt. That night, as the rain began to fall, I realized the line between love and control in this family had blurred long ago. And tomorrow I'd have to find out just how far that line had been crossed. The following morning, I woke up before the rain had even stopped, the kind of half-light where everything looks uncertain, like the world hasn't decided whether to wake or stay asleep. My coffee sat untouched as I stared at the note I'd found in Clara's handwriting. If she ever forgets her promise, remind her what love costs. The words didn't sound like my wife. Clara had been sentimental, yes, but never cryptic. That line read more like a warning than affection. I folded the paper and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Whatever she'd meant, it was time to hear it from Megan herself, and this time I wasn't coming as the confused old man everyone thought I'd become. Before driving to her house again, I stopped by my lawyer's office. Mr. Whitman had handled all of Clara's estate affairs after her death, and though I hadn't seen him in years, he still remembered the Mercers well. He looked surprised when I walked in. "Daniel," he said, rising from his chair, "you look unsettled." "Everything all right. I need to ask about my burial contract," I said bluntly. He gestured for me to sit. "That's an unusual topic for 9 in the morning. I just need to know who has authority over my plot, legally speaking." He pulled out a file from his cabinet, flipping through yellowing pages. "Let's see. You and Clara purchased dual plots 12 years ago, both paid in full. After her passing, the deed remained under your name." He paused. "However, 6 months ago, there was an amendment." My stomach turned. "An amendment?" "Yes. The document was updated to include a second contact, someone authorized to make arrangements in your absence. A Mrs. Megan Mercer." I stared at him. "And you let that go through?" "It came with your signature," Whitman said, carefully sliding the paper toward me. My name sprawled across the bottom, neat and confident, but not mine. "That's not my handwriting," I said quietly. He adjusted his glasses. "I thought it looked different. But the request came with identification, your driver's license photocopy, even the same notary seal you used years ago." Everything checked out. "Someone forged it," I said. Whitman frowned. "Daniel, if you suspect fraud, we can investigate. But before we escalate, think about whether it might have been a misunderstanding. Families, sometimes. It's not a misunderstanding." I cut in. "It's deliberate." I thanked him and left before he could argue. The air outside was cold, sharp, like the kind that clears your thoughts while making your hands tremble. By the time I pulled into Peter and Megan's driveway, I'd rehearsed every word I wanted to say. But when Megan opened the door, all of them fell apart. She looked startled, not scared, just surprised I'd actually returned. "Daniel," she said, cautiously, "we need to talk," I told her. "Alone." She led me into the kitchen. The house was quiet. Peter was at work, the kids at school. Only the hum of the refrigerator filled the space. I laid the forged document on the counter. You forged my signature. You changed my burial rites, and you've been pretending to be me. Her face remained unreadable for a long moment. Then slowly she sat down, folded her hands, and said, "You weren't supposed to find out like this." "Find out what?" "That your wife didn't trust you with the truth." "What truth?" She looked at me with something between pity and victory, that she was dying faster than she admitted, that she'd been writing letters to everyone, me, Peter, even your daughter, arranging things you wouldn't be able to face. She wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of, even if you resisted. "Taken care of," I repeated, "by staging my death." "She wanted you to confront it," Megan said softly. "She believed you'd never move on otherwise." I felt my pulse thundering in my ears. "So this is therapy to you? Forging my name, putting flowers on my grave, making me think I'm losing my mind. That's love. Clara thought you'd only accept peace if it was forced on you. She called it the gentle rehearsal. That phrase struck me like a slap. I remembered the night before she died, when she'd held my hand and whispered, "Promise me you'll practice letting go." I thought she'd meant emotionally, not literally. She told me, Megan continued, that people fear death because they never look it in the eye. So she made me promise that when the time felt right, I'd show you what waiting looked like. I stood there speechless. My own wife had turned her death into a project, and Megan had become its executor. But why now, I asked. Why, after all these years? Megan hesitated. Because you started isolating yourself. Clara predicted that too. She said, "When he starts living like he's already gone, that's when you must remind him he's still here." The flowers, the engraving, it wasn't meant to scare you. It was meant to wake you up. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to shout, but there was something deeply, painfully ironic about it. My wife had spent years trying to prepare me for death, and now I was being forced to prepare for life. Still, one thing didn't add up. Why forge Peter's name? Why the secrecy? Her eyes softened. Because you wouldn't have listened otherwise. And because Peter wouldn't have agreed. "Did you think deceiving me would somehow honor her?" She sighed. "You wouldn't understand. Clara trusted me because I could do what she never could, make you surrender control. For a moment I saw her not as the villain, but as a disciple, someone carrying out Clara's strange final gospel. But even devotion can turn toxic. You've crossed a line," I said quietly. "You made me question my sanity." "You were supposed to," she replied calmly. "That's how people change." There was a long silence. Rain pattered against the window. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed, and I realized my hands were shaking. "I'm going to the police," I said finally. "This isn't love. It's fraud." "You won't," she said, her voice steady. "Because deep down you know Clara was right. You needed this." I turned to leave, but her next words stopped me cold. She wanted me to leave something on the grave after the flowers. "Did you find it yet?" I froze. "Find what?" Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Then I suppose the lesson isn't over." I left without another word, heart pounding, mind spinning. On the drive back, every raindrop on the windshield felt like a heartbeat counting down to something inevitable. When I reached the cemetery, the sky had cleared, and the world smelled like wet earth and pine again. My grave looked the same, polished stone, trimmed grass, lilies swaying in the breeze. But at the base of the headstone, half buried in mud, something metallic glimmered. I crouched down and brushed away the dirt. It was a small brass box, the kind Clara used to keep jewelry in. My name was engraved on the lid. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside lay a folded note and my wedding ring, the one Clara had worn on her finger for 50 years. I hadn't seen it since the funeral. The note read, "You think death is what ends love, but it's what reveals it. Stop preparing. Start living." I sank to the ground, the grass damp beneath my knees. For the first time since she died, I cried not from grief, but from the strange, infuriating love that woman still managed to control from beyond her own grave. People still debate whether it's cruel or kind to protect someone from themselves. Maybe it's both. Clara always had a way of being both tender and ruthless in the same breath. When I finally stood up, I slipped her ring into my pocket and whispered, "All right, Clara." Message received. As I walked back toward my car, I realized the fear I'd been carrying. The dread of death, the paranoia of being erased, had shifted into something quieter, steadier. I wasn't ready to die, not yet, but for the first time, I was ready to stop running from it. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. No ticking clock, no phantom footsteps, no restless whisper in my head. But when morning came, peace turned to unease. Again, not because of what had happened, but because of what hadn't. Clara's message, as unsettling as it was, should have ended things. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. There were still too many unanswered questions. The forged signature, the burial rites, and Megan's calm insistence that the lesson wasn't finished. When you've lived 6 decades, you learn that closure rarely arrives gift-wrapped. It's messy. It's human. It demands that you dig through the dirt even when your hands are already tired. So that's what I decided to do. That morning I called my daughter, Lily. She'd moved out to Oregon years ago, estranged in the quiet way adult children sometimes drift away, not through anger, but exhaustion. We hadn't spoken in months. When she picked up, her voice carried that polite distance people reserve for relatives they love but can't quite trust. "Dad, everything okay?" "I found something," I said. "About your mother." A sigh. "Dad, please don't start." "No, listen." She wrote to Megan before she died, asked her to take care of me. But Megan forged documents, changed my burial contract, and I hesitated, lowering my voice. "She's been pretending to be me." There was silence, then a sharp exhale. "That woman, Lily," muttered. "I knew she'd pull something like this. Mom warned me." That caught my attention. "Warned you about what?" Lily hesitated. "Mom sent me a letter, too, right before she passed. I've never told anyone." "What did it say?" "I still have it somewhere," she said, "but I remember the first line clearly. If Daniel can't face life without me, don't fight Megan when she tries to help him." I sat there, stunned. "So she involved you too?" "Yes," Lily said quietly. She made it sound like a shared mission. But I never agreed to anything. I thought Mom was just trying to control things one last time. You know how she was. She needed to manage every detail, even her own absence. I almost laughed. That was Clara to the bone, controlling, loving, infuriatingly prepared. "Do you still have that letter?" I asked. "I'll send a photo," she said. "But Dad, be careful. If Megan's using Mom's words for her own agenda, she might not stop here." The warning chilled me. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone until the message came through a photo of the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably Clara's, but there was a difference. It looked rushed, the loops uneven, the ink smudged. At the bottom, a postscript in shaky cursive read, "If she goes too far, stop her before she stops you." I didn't know what Clara meant by that, but I suddenly felt like I was standing in the middle of a test I hadn't agreed to take. Later that afternoon, Henry from the cemetery called. "Mr. Mercer," he said hesitantly, "something's come up. I think you should come down here." I drove straight there. Henry met me near my plot, his brow furrowed. Someone was here again this morning, left another bouquet. But that's not all. He pointed to the ground beside the grave. There, etched lightly into the damp soil, were letters uneven as if drawn with a stick. Soon. My pulse spiked. Did you see who did it? He shook his head. I checked the cameras. Same figure as before. Same coat, same hat. But you still think it's me, don't you? Henry sighed. I don't know what to think anymore. I knelt by the writing, tracing the letters with my fingertips. The message wasn't a threat, not exactly. It was a statement. Or a reminder. Soon. But soon. What? When I got back to the car, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Megan. We should talk again. Alone. You deserve to know the rest. I didn't reply. I drove straight home, locked the door, and poured myself another drink I didn't need. The world outside looked muted, the kind of quiet that feels like a warning. That evening, Lily called back. Dad? I've been thinking. Maybe Mom knew something about Megan we didn't. Maybe that's why she left those clues. Clues, I asked. She was dying, Dad. People don't write riddles unless they want something found. I looked at Clara's journals, stacked on my desk. There were still several volumes I hadn't read. I opened one at random, dated 3 weeks before her death. Most of it was about pain management, hospice visits, the slow betrayal of her body. But one entry made me stop, cold. Megan says she understands now. She'll make sure he never forgets what love costs. She promised me that. The same words as in the note at the grave. What love costs. Suddenly it clicked, the box, the flowers, the forged paperwork. None of it was about my death. It was about debt, emotional debt. Clara wanted me to feel the weight of her loss as payment for all the times I'd avoided confronting it. But Megan, she'd taken that symbolic mission and twisted it into something else, something about control, legacy, maybe even power. People still debate whether grief purifies or corrupts. I think it depends on who's holding it. By nightfall, I'd made my decision. If Megan wanted another conversation, she'd get one. But this time, I'd be ready. I arrived at her house after dark. The streetlights were dim, the neighborhood asleep. Her car was in the driveway, engine still warm. I knocked once, no answer. Twice, still nothing. The third time, the door creaked open, unlocked. Megan, I called. Silence. The living room lights were low, a single lamp casting a faint glow over the mantel. My photo, the copy of me and Clara, was gone. The space looked stripped, as if someone had packed in a hurry. Then I heard movement upstairs. Soft, deliberate. I climbed the steps slowly, every creak echoing like a heartbeat. At the top of the landing, her bedroom door was half open. Inside, she was sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers, Clara's letters, copies of my burial documents, photos of the cemetery. She didn't look up when I entered. You weren't supposed to come tonight, she said quietly. Then why text me? Because I thought you'd wait. You never could be patient. Daniel. I looked around the room. What is all this? Proof, she said simply. Clara planned everything, every date, every signature. I just followed the instructions. I picked up one of the letters, but the handwriting was wrong. Too neat, too recent. You wrote these, I said. She finally looked at me, her eyes bright and tired. I finished what she started. That was when I saw the folder labeled Insurance Beneficiary Transfer, and beneath it a check with my name, Clara's old policy number, and a new beneficiary, Megan Mercer. My heart sank. So this was about money. She shook her head slowly. It started that way. But then it became about meaning. Clara trusted me because I didn't flinch at death. You did. I realized then that her calm wasn't guilt. It was conviction. She believed every word of her own madness. You forged my name to inherit money that isn't yours, I said. I preserved her legacy, she countered. And you should be grateful. You'll never be forgotten now. Your grave, your flowers, they'll always be perfect. I took a step closer. You think that's what Clara wanted, to immortalize your control? She wanted peace, Megan said softly. I gave it to her. For a moment, we just stood there. Two people orbiting the ghost of a woman who'd managed to command both our lives long after hers ended. Then I reached for the papers, tore the check in half, and said, "You're done managing me." Her expression didn't change. She just smiled faintly and whispered, "We'll see." As I walked out, she called after me, "You can't bury the truth, Daniel. It always flowers back." Her words followed me all the way home. The rain had started again, fine and cold. Somewhere deep down I knew she wasn't finished, but neither was I. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Clara's face. Not the gentle woman who used to hum while cooking or fall asleep with a book on her chest, but the version Megan had conjured, the one who left riddles and lessons and permission for madness. Grief has a way of distorting memories until love and manipulation start to look alike. I wasn't sure which version of Clara I had married anymore. I poured myself another glass of whiskey and sat by the window. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like iron and wet leaves. From my chair, I could see the faint glow of the cemetery lights beyond the hill. I'd lived near that place for years and never noticed them before. Now they looked like eyes staring back. I thought about calling the police. I had enough proof, the forged documents, the insurance attempt, the CCTV footage. But some small irrational part of me hesitated. Maybe because if I exposed Megan, I'd also be exposing Clara, the woman who'd started all of this. And I wasn't sure I was ready to destroy the last thing she'd left behind, even if it was a tangled mess of guilt and obsession. People still debate whether love should be protected even when it's poisonous. I think we protect it because we're afraid of what's left when it's gone. Around 3 a.m., I finally stood up and went to my study. The brass box from the grave still sat on my desk. Inside, beneath the ring and the note, was something I hadn't noticed before, a small folded photo tucked in the lining. When I pulled it out, I almost dropped it. It was a picture of Megan and Clara together, taken in my own backyard. Clara looked frail, wrapped in a blanket, but she was smiling a soft, secretive smile I'd never seen before. On the back, in Clara's handwriting, were 3 words, "She knows how." How to what at dawn? I drove to the cemetery again, as if pulled by some invisible thread. The grass shimmered with dew, and the air carried that strange hush you only hear among the dead, like time itself slows down to listen. Henry wasn't around. I walked straight to my grave. The flowers were gone, all of them. In their place was something new, a small stone plaque that hadn't been there yesterday. It read, "Reserved for peace of mind." I don't know why, but those words made me laugh, a dry, humorless laugh that caught in my throat. It was as if Clara herself had written them, teasing me from beyond reason. I took the plaque and threw it aside, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet morning. When I got home, I found a letter in my mailbox with no return address. Inside, a single page. Clara's handwriting again, though shakier this time. If you're reading this, you've found her lies. But don't mistake them for mine. The promise was never about your death, Daniel. It was about forgiveness. You can't die in peace if you keep hating the living. My chest tightened. For a moment, everything around me blurred, the walls, the furniture, even the air. Clara's words hit harder than any accusation. Forgiveness. That was the one thing I hadn't given anyone, not Clara, not Megan, not even myself. Later that morning, Peter showed up at my door, pale and exhausted. "Dad, we need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I braced myself. What now? He sat down heavily. "Megan's gone. She left last night. Took the car, her phone, everything. I woke up and she was just gone." "Did she leave a note?" He nodded and handed me a folded piece of paper. The handwriting wasn't Clara's this time. It was Megan's, neat and controlled. "Daniel, I did what I promised. You're awake now. Clara can rest. Don't look for me." Peter rubbed his temples. "What the hell happened between you two?" "Dad," she said, "you threatened her." "I didn't threaten her," I said quietly. "I confronted her." He stared at me, searching my face for something. Guilt, anger, sanity. "You've been acting strange for weeks," he said. "First the flowers, then the police reports, now this. Maybe it's time you let it go." "Let it go," I snapped. "She forged my name, Peter. She tried to steal from your mother's estate. She made me think I was losing my mind, Dad," he said softly. "Mom's been gone a long time. Maybe it's not just Megan you're angry at." The words stung because they were true. I wasn't just angry at Megan. I was angry at Clara for turning her death into a performance at myself, for playing along at time, for making all of it irreversible. After Peter left, I sat for a long time in silence. The whiskey on the table had gone untouched. The morning sun crept across the floor, warming the edge of Clara's photograph. For the first time, I noticed how her eyes seemed to look past the camera, as if she were already seeing something beyond us. That afternoon, I packed a small bag, drove to the coast, and checked into a seaside motel. I needed space from the house, the cemetery, the memories. The ocean has always been my reset button, vast, unjudging, endless. Clara loved it too. She used to say the waves were God's way of reminding us that everything comes back, even after breaking. Sitting on that balcony, I thought about what forgiveness actually meant. It wasn't about excusing betrayal. It was about refusing to let it poison you any further. Clara had lived her whole life trying to control fate. Megan had tried to control me. And I had spent years trying to control grief by locking it away. Maybe that's why she'd chosen Megan, flawed as she was. She needed someone who would shake me, force me to feel something again. When I checked my voicemail that evening, there was one new message. A woman's voice, calm and familiar. "Daniel, it's Megan. Don't be angry. I'm going away for a while. There's something Clara wanted me to do. Something I couldn't explain. You'll understand soon. Goodbye. No location, no details. Just you'll understand soon." That night I stood by the shore, watching the moon ripple across the waves. The world felt enormous and indifferent, a reminder that we're all just temporary names carved into someone else's story. And yet, somewhere between the crash of the tide and the hiss of the wind, I felt something loosen inside me. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a decision. Maybe it was a surrender, a quiet acceptance that life, like the ocean, keeps moving, whether you're ready or not. When I returned home the next morning, my phone rang again. It was Henry from the cemetery. His voice was trembling. "Mr. Mercer, I thought you should know. Someone left another arrangement last night. Same spot, same lilies." I closed my eyes. "Did you see who it was?" "No, sir, but they left a card this time." He hesitated, then read it aloud. "You've finally learned what love costs. Now rest easy, Daniel. M." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Maybe Megan was still following Clara's script. Maybe she believed this was how closure looked, a ritual of endings. But for once, I didn't feel anger, just exhaustion and a strange calm. The grave that had once terrified me now felt like a mirror, a place not of endings, but of acknowledgments. I wasn't ready to fill it, but I no longer feared it either. I whispered to the air, "All right, Clara, I forgive you, and her too." The wind shifted soft and warm, carrying the faint scent of lilies. Weeks passed, the kind of quiet, ordinary weeks that slip through your fingers before you realize they're gone. I tried to return to something resembling a routine, morning walks, crossword puzzles, the occasional visit from Peter. But there was an invisible shift inside me. Ever since that last message, my anger had drained away, leaving only a deep, cautious curiosity. It's strange when you stop fighting ghosts, you start listening to what they've been trying to say. I began to visit the cemetery every Sunday. Not out of obsession this time, but out of obligation, not to the dead, but to myself. The flowers kept coming. Always the same white lilies, perfectly arranged, fresh, every week. There was never anyone there when I arrived, no footprints, no cars nearby. Just the flowers, and the faint trace of perfume I recognized as Clara's. Henry had stopped asking questions. He'd learned to accept that some things in life resist logic. One morning, as he trimmed the grass near my wife's grave, he looked up and said, "You know, Mr. Mercer, some folks spend their whole lives trying to be remembered. Looks like you won't have to worry about that." I chuckled. "Being remembered isn't the same as being understood, Henry." He smiled faintly. "Ain't that the truth?" That afternoon, I went through Clara's journals again. I'd read them so many times they'd become familiar, but this time, I wasn't looking for clues. I was looking for her voice, not the riddles, not the instructions, just her. I found an entry from the early years of our marriage. "Danny worries too much about what happens after. I just want him to notice what's happening now. If I die first, I hope he learns that the best way to honor the living is to keep living." It felt like a time capsule, a simpler Clara, speaking to me across decades. Not the orchestrator of graves and letters, but the woman who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen when she thought no one was watching. That night I sat on the porch with my coffee and watched the sun dip below the horizon. The world looked softer, somehow less hostile. I even caught myself humming one of Clara's old tunes. That's when I noticed an envelope tucked under my front doormat. No stamp, no address. Just one word on the front, Daniel. Inside was a single page, typed not handwritten. "I'm safe. I've taken Clara's ashes to where she wanted them. She never told you, but she didn't want to stay in that cemetery. She said you needed a reason to leave home again, to travel one last time. I'm leaving something for you where she rests now. When you're ready, follow the lilies. M." No signature, but I didn't need one. Megan's precision was unmistakable. I should have gone straight to the police, but something inside me resisted. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe it was the echo of Clara's wish for me to stop hiding behind control. If this was the final chapter of her strange lesson, I needed to see it through. I spent the next few days searching through old photographs, trying to guess where Clara might have wanted her ashes scattered. We'd traveled a lot when we were young, the Grand Canyon, the Smokies, even a small cabin on the Oregon coast where we spent our honeymoon. But there was one place she loved most. Willow Creek, a quiet lake 2 hours north, where she used to paint the sunsets. When I arrived there, the world looked exactly as it had 40 years ago. The trees leaned gently over the water, the surface smooth as glass. A trail of white lilies floated near the shore, drifting lazily toward the center. My heart pounded. I followed the trail, stepping carefully across the rocks until I reached the old wooden pier where Clara and I had once carved our initials. There, sitting at the edge of the planks, was another brass box, identical to the one from the grave. Inside was a small jar of ashes, wrapped in a silk handkerchief embroidered with her initials and a folded note. My hands shook as I opened it. Danny, if you're reading this, then you've finally done what I hoped. You've stopped waiting for the end. Megan helped because I asked her to, though she may have added her own ideas along the way. Don't hate her. She did what I couldn't. She made you feel alive again. This is my real resting place. Scatter what's left of me here where we began. There was one last line written faintly in pencil. Promise me you won't come back here to die. Promise you'll live somewhere new. I sat there for a long time staring at the water. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of pine and rain. When I finally opened the jar, the ashes caught the light like dust made of memory. I let them fall slowly into the lake, watching them vanish beneath the ripples. For the first time, it didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like release. As I stood to leave, I noticed something carved into the railing, fresh, not from our youth. It read, "She was right." I didn't know if Megan had written it or if Clara had arranged for someone else to. At this point, it didn't matter. The message was clear. On the drive home, I felt lighter than I had in years. But there was still one final thing I needed to do. I stopped by the cemetery one last time. The lilies were there, as always. I placed a single wildflower between them, something simple, something alive. "I'm done with rehearsing, Clara," I said softly. "You win." That evening, Peter called. "Dad, you sound different," he said. "I am," I replied. "Your mother got what she wanted. I've finally learned how to let go." He was quiet for a moment. "And Megan gone," I said. "But somehow I think she's exactly where she's supposed to be. People still debate whether the living owe anything. To the dead, I used to think we did, that we had to carry their memories like chains to prove our love. But now I know the dead don't need us to remember them. They need us to keep moving." When I hung up, I sat by the window, watching the first fireflies of the season blink through the darkness. For the first time in years, the silence felt peaceful, not lonely. I wasn't afraid of my grave anymore. It could wait. The summer stretched on and life began to find its rhythm again. I sold the house, the one Clara and I had built brick by brick, filled with years of laughter and arguments and quiet Sunday mornings. It was time. A couple in their 40s bought it, said they loved the garden, the fireplace, the soul of the place. I didn't tell them that half that soul still lingered in the walls. Some truths are meant to stay behind. I moved into a small cottage near the lake, not far from where I had scattered Clara's ashes. The air there was cleaner, the silence softer. Sometimes I'd catch myself speaking to her out loud, not like a man haunted, but like an old friend, still keeping her seat warm at the table. I'd say things like, "You see, Clara, I actually remembered to water the plants today," or "The neighbors think I'm harmless. Can you imagine that?" It was funny how natural it felt. One evening, while I was sorting through old boxes, I found a small envelope at the bottom of Clara's keepsake chest. My name was written on it, but this time the ink had almost faded. Inside was a photograph, me, Clara, and 2-year-old Peter sitting on the same dock at Willow Creek. On the back, in Clara's neat handwriting, it said, "Every ending is just a memory waiting to be forgiven." I think I must have stared at that photo for an hour. It wasn't sadness that hit me. It was something quieter, a kind of gratitude that life had been messy, unpredictable, and real. The next morning, I took a walk by the water. The pier looked different now, worn, cracked, half swallowed by moss, but it still held that quiet dignity of things that refused to disappear. I watched the sunlight shimmer over the surface and thought about Megan. I hadn't heard from her since that last message. Sometimes I wondered if she'd gone to start over, or if the guilt of What she'd done had driven her somewhere she couldn't return from. I didn't hate her anymore. She was part of the story just like the rest of us, flawed, scared, trying to turn grief into meaning. I had coffee with Henry once a week now. He liked to talk about the odd people he met at the cemetery, a widow who brought whiskey for her late husband, a boy who left comic books for his father. One day he looked at me and said, "Funny thing, Mr. Mercer. Ever notice how the living bring the dead what they needed when they were alive? Flowers' music, love. Maybe it's our way of saying sorry for not giving it sooner." I smiled. "You might be right. Do you still visit your wife's grave?" he asked gently. "Not as much," I admitted. "She's not there anymore. She's in everything I do now." That seemed to please him. "Then you've made peace," he said. Peace. The word felt strange in my mouth, like something too soft to describe what I'd been through. But maybe peace wasn't about quiet. Maybe it was about understanding that pain and love were just two sides of the same thing, reminders that you lived fully enough to leave scars. People still debate whether it's better to die prepared or to live unprepared. I used to think planning for the end was responsible. Now, I think it's cowardice disguised as order, because no matter how many contracts you sign or stones you polish, nothing prepares you for absence, and nothing ever really ends. One night, about a month later, I heard a knock at the door. It was well past midnight. My heart jumped at my age. Late-night visitors rarely bring good news. When I opened the door, there was no one there, just a single object on the doormat, a white lily tied with a thin green ribbon. No card, no note, no message. I stood there for a long moment, the cool air brushing against my skin, the quiet pressing in. Then, without quite knowing why, I smiled. Whoever had left it, Megan, Henry, a stranger, didn't matter. It wasn't about fear anymore. It was about continuity. Someone still remembered. I placed the lily in a glass of water and set it on my nightstand beside Clara's photo. For the first time, the image didn't look like a memory frozen in time. It looked alive, like she might step out of the frame and tell me I'd taken far too long to learn what she'd known all along, that love doesn't end. It just changes shape. The next morning, I woke before dawn and went down to the lake. The mist hovered over the surface like a veil. I walked to the end of the pier, the boards creaking under my weight, and threw the lily into the water. It floated for a moment, then drifted away, spinning gently with the current. "Goodbye, Clara," I whispered. "For real this time." As the sun began to rise, the world turned golden, the kind of light that makes everything, even loss, look softer. And for the first time since this whole story began, I didn't feel like I was visiting death. I felt like I was walking home. When I got back to the cottage, I found a letter slipped under the door. No name, no stamp. Just a line written in graceful handwriting. "Rest easy, Daniel. You kept your promise. I didn't need to open it. Some endings don't need explanations." That night, I sat by the fire with my journal and finally began to write, not about graves or ghosts, but about the strange ways love teaches us to keep living. And as I wrote the first line, I realized it wasn't a story of death at all. It was a story of return. Autumn arrived quietly the way it always does, sneaking in through the window with the scent of pine and smoke trading the lake's green shimmer for gold. The trees around the cottage began to thin, their reflections trembling on the water. Every morning I'd step outside with my coffee and watch the fog roll off the surface like the world exhaling. It was beautiful in that kind of lonely way that only older people seem to notice. Not sadness, not peace, just the gentle fading of noise. I'd been keeping a journal since that night by the fire, Writing came naturally, maybe because it felt like a conversation not with anyone else, but with the echo of all the versions of myself I'd been. The angry husband, the grieving widower, the confused old man chasing ghosts through headstones. And now, maybe just a man trying to make sense of what was left. Some nights I'd read aloud what I'd written as if Clara were listening. I'd tell her how I'd finally forgiven her, how I even forgave Megan, and how the whole thing, the flowers, the grave, the lies had somehow turned into a strange kind of gift. Because that's the truth I hadn't understood. Before closure doesn't come when you find the answers. It comes when you stop needing them. One afternoon, while cleaning out the attic of the cottage, I found a box of old cassette tapes. Clara's handwriting again, each one labeled neatly in her small cursive. For Daniel only when you're ready. I sat down on the floor, dust covering my hands, and fed the first one into an old tape player I'd found in a drawer. The static gave way to her voice, faint, soft, painfully alive. "Hi, Danny," she said, laughing a little. "If you're listening to this, I suppose I'm gone, and you're doing what you always do, overthinking everything. So let's make this easy." Her voice cracked slightly. "You always told me I planned too much. You were right. But I couldn't help it. I was scared you'd stop living once I did. So I tried to build a map for you, one made of small reminders, flowers, letters, a few gentle shocks to keep you moving. If any of them hurt you, I'm sorry. I just didn't want you to disappear before your time." She paused for a moment, and I could hear her breathing slow and shallow. I asked Megan for help because she understood loss in a way I didn't. Maybe she went too far. Maybe I did too. But promise me one thing. Danny, don't waste your forgiveness on ghosts. Use it on yourself. The tape clicked off. I sat there for a long time, the quiet buzzing in my ears. It was strange I'd spent so long trying to make peace with Clara's death, and now she was asking me to make peace with her mistakes. It felt like an entirely new kind of grief, softer, but deeper. I played another tape. This one was recorded later. Her voice, weaker words, slower. "If you're still listening," she said, "it means you've stayed. Thank you. I hope you've gone back to the lake. I hope you've forgiven me for what I couldn't say then, that I loved you more than I trusted you. And that was my flaw." I laughed through my tears. "You were right, Clara," I said aloud. "It was your flaw. And mine too." The third tape was blank, just the sound of wind and faint birdsong. I didn't mind. It felt like the right ending, the silence she'd left behind becoming part of the music. Over the next few days, I decided to organize the tapes and letters into something coherent. Maybe a small memoir, maybe a series of reflections. I titled the first page, "The Flowers Were Never About Death." It felt fitting. Around this time, Peter came to visit. He hadn't seen the cottage yet. When he arrived, he looked around and said, "It suits you, Dad. Peaceful. You look lighter." "I feel lighter," I said. He sat down with me on the porch, sipping coffee while we watched the leaves fall. "I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately," he said quietly. "All the things she planned. Sometimes I wonder if she knew how much chaos she'd cause." I smiled faintly. She knew. She just believed the chaos had purpose. "Did it?" he asked. I thought about it for a while before answering. "Yes. It forced me to remember that I'm still alive." He nodded slowly. "You know?" Megan called. I turned to him surprised. "She did?" "Yeah. Said she's in Maine now, working at some hospice center. She didn't say much, just that she was sorry for everything. She asked me to tell you that she's leaving the past alone." I stared at the lake. "Good," I said softly. "That's where it belongs." Peter hesitated. "You gonna forgive her? I already did," I said. "Holding on was her burden. Letting go is mine." He smiled, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who used to sit on my shoulders at the county fair, shouting that he could see forever. When he left that evening, the world was dipped in amber light. The lake shimmered like molten glass. I stood there until the sun disappeared completely, whispering a quiet thank you, not to anyone in particular, just to the strange, unpredictable rhythm of life that had carried me this far. That night I played the last tape again. Clara's voice filled the room like a ghost wrapped in warmth. "You probably think I left you too many messages," she said. "But the truth is, I never stopped talking to you. I just changed the way I did it." I smiled through the ache in my chest. "You never stopped, Clara. You just changed shape." And for the first time, the word death didn't sound like an ending anymore. It sounded like a continuation, a quiet sentence that simply paused mid-thought, waiting for the next breath. Winter came softly that year, coating the lake in a fragile layer of frost. I'd grown used to the rhythm of solitude, the creak of the floorboards, the kettle's sigh, the way the trees whispered to each other when the wind moved through them. It was a good kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't remind you of what's missing, but of what remains. Some mornings I'd wake up before sunrise and watch the mist drift above the frozen surface, that pale light spreading like forgiveness across the water. The journal had grown thick, pages upon pages of memories, reflections, confessions, a lifetime compressed into ink. I'd written about Clara's laughter, about the anger I never voiced, about Megan's strange devotion, and the way grief twists love into something both cruel and kind. Writing had become a way of staying honest with myself, because at 69, honesty is all that's left to trade. I hadn't been back to the cemetery in months, not because I avoided it, but because I didn't need to anymore. The grave had done its job. It had forced me to look at my own name and realize that the real fear was never dying. It was living half asleep. Still, one morning in December, I felt the pull again, maybe curiosity, maybe habit. The air bit at my face as I parked by the gate. The world was white, and still the headstones half buried under snow. When I reached Clara's grave, our grave, I saw that someone had been there recently. The snow around it had been brushed away carefully, and there, as always, was a bouquet of lilies. But something was different. This time, a small wooden frame leaned against the headstone. Inside was a photograph, Clara and me on our wedding day, smiling, radiant, impossibly young. And tucked in the corner was a folded note. I opened it carefully, my breath fogging in the cold. "You kept your promise. You lived. That's all she ever wanted. M." I stood there for a long time, the note trembling slightly in my gloved hand. Then I smiled. It wasn't forgiveness that washed over me this time. It was completion. Megan had finally understood what Clara had meant all along. Maybe she'd needed this journey as much as I had. Maybe she'd found her own peace by returning the story to where it began. I knelt, brushed the snow from Clara's name, and whispered, "You were right, love. It took me too long to understand, but I'm here now. And I'm not afraid anymore." The wind stirred the lilies, scattering a few petals across the marble. For a moment, it almost felt like she answered not with words, but with presence. A warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. A familiar weight pressing gently against my chest. I took that feeling home with me. The days that followed blurred into quiet routines again, reading, walking, writing. My body ached more often now, but I'd stopped resenting it. Age was no longer the enemy. It was simply proof that I'd survived my story long enough to tell it. One evening, as I sat by the fireplace, I decided to record something new. Not another journal entry, but a message of my own. I set up my old cassette recorder, pressed the red button, and spoke into the soft static. "Hey, Clara?" I began, my voice calm. "You left me a lot of instructions, you know. Flowers, contracts, riddles. I followed most of them even when I didn't understand. But I think it's my turn to leave something for you now." I paused, smiling faintly. "I forgive you. For the manipulation, for the secrets, for loving me in a way that hurt sometimes. I know you did it because you were scared to let go. And maybe I was too. But I learned. I learned that love isn't about control, it's about trust. It's about believing the world keeps going even when we stop." I took a breath. The fire crackled softly. "You wanted me to live. I have. I've walked by the lake, talked to our son, made peace with the woman who tried to teach me your lesson, a little too literally. I even started smiling again, Clara. You'd like that. You always said my smile was too rare." I laughed quietly to myself. If you can hear this wherever you are, know that I'm okay. I'm not waiting for the end anymore. I'm just here, living. I clicked off the recorder and labeled the tape for whoever finds this. Then I placed it inside the brass box, the same one that once held her ring, and tucked it into a drawer. A small, full circle, my voice next to hers. People still debate whether we ever truly move on or simply learn to carry what remains. I think it's both. The pain doesn't leave. It just grows lighter when you stop gripping it so tightly. As winter deepened, the lake froze completely. Children from the nearby town came to skate, their laughter carrying across the ice. I'd watch them from my porch, their joy sharp and bright against the gray sky. Once, a little girl waved at me, her scarf fluttering in the wind. Without thinking, I waved back. It felt like an instinct, the simplest, purest gesture of connection. That night, I dreamed of Clara. Not as she was in her last days, frail and fading, but as she had been when we first met, standing barefoot in the grass, sunlight tangled in her hair, smiling like she knew something I didn't. When I woke, I didn't feel loss. I felt gratitude. For the years, for the lessons, for the strange and beautiful way love refuses to end. Before I went to bed that night, I whispered to the empty room, "Good night, Clara, and thank you for teaching me how to live." And if she answered, it was in the quiet, the kind of quiet that no longer scared me. The story ends where life continues. Quietly, without applause, just the steady rhythm of breath and memory. It's strange how grief changes shape over time. At first, it's sharp, cutting through every thought. Then slowly it softens, turns to warmth, and eventually to wisdom. Standing here now, older, slower, but finally at peace, I understand that death isn't a wall. It's a window. And through it we see not the end, but the proof that love once existed. Sometimes when the wind passes over the lake, I imagine it carries whispers, bits of laughter, unfinished conversations, small promises still drifting between worlds. I used to think I was haunted by Clara, but now I think I'm simply accompanied. Her absence taught me presence. Her silence taught me to listen. Her death taught me to live. And maybe that's what every story like this is about, not ghosts or graves or flowers, but the quiet courage it takes to stay alive after love. So if you've stayed with me until now, thank you for listening. I hope you find your own way to forgive, to remember, and to keep walking forward even when the path looks like an ending. Now turn off the lights, maybe leave the window cracked a little, and let the night hum around you. Because somewhere in that hum, between the stillness and the echo, someone you've loved is smiling proud that you're still here. Good night. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you'll be here for the next story.